Welcome to the very first Epic Exchanges video podcast. So, what we're going to do is take our interview podcasts from the regular Apple podcast platform and show you our raw and unedited video of the interviews. One thing I want to say is that we are now doing a little series on the importance of sharing our stories. And this is because here at Epic Exchanges, we are publishing a book called The Gift in Your Story that will debut and launch and be available on February 25th. So over the next few weeks, I'll be featuring some of the authors in that book and talking about the process of sharing our stories and why people choose to do it. My first guest is Tammy McCook Haywood, and I've actually known Tammy for a while, but I'm going to let Tammy introduce herself.
Hi, Kelly. Thank you so much for having me here. I'm super excited. It is my first podcast as well. So I'm a family first girl. I love being a wife. I love being a mother. I've been married about 25 years to the same man. We have 3 beautiful children. My oldest is 33. My next one is 20, and I have a 14-year-old daughter. So I'm out of the small children phase, but definitely still raising my kids. I've pretty much mainly been a stay-at-home mom, but about 12 years ago, let's say, decided I would go back to working. And I've always been passionate about design and have an education in design. Did some projects in my early 20s, so decided to pick that up. And I started to freelance and kind of have grown it into a great little home business as an interior designer. So I had a little blip in my life about 10 years ago. My father had been very ill with esophageal cancer. He was ill for about 18 months, and we kind of traveled the world following him from hospital to hospital because his dream, of course, was to be in all of his various places. And when he passed within days of my birthday, my 43rd birthday. And I decided at that time I would go and, oh, Kelly, I'm back in my story.
It's okay. Keep going. I thought that when you started talking about your dad, but hey, we're unedited, we're raw.
It's when you introduce yourself, it's so hard to separate who you are.
Right. Okay. So why don't we, because let's be just real here on YouTube, right? Sure. Why don't you now start your story again, because then it's clean for the audio version. Sure. And just start the story part. So, okay. So yes, so YouTube audience.
My story begins when I was 43 and diagnosed with cancer. It was breast cancer. I didn't have a lump or bump, but I'd gone for a full physical because I wanted to have a healthy baseline to move forward with my life as I started to age. And nobody could have been more surprised than me when I got the phone call to say, yes, I had cancer. So I immediately had a double mastectomy. It was what I thought for me was the best option. And I started to, talk to other women. Of course, you start to become friendly with other women who've been through the same experience to hear their stories and seek advice and change names of specialists, things like that. Definitely got involved in a few different groups on Facebook and found out I had a second cousin in the States also going through the same thing. And at the end of my cancer, when I was deemed cancer free, I noticed that almost everybody in my world who'd had cancer had this amazing, like, wow, I'm going to do this differently. This has changed in my life. It totally opened up my eyes. And I didn't have that same experience. And it really made me feel guilty. And I started to wonder about what was it that for me just didn't give me a light bulb moment. And I kind of went on my way and just carried on with my life. I was so grateful that my diagnosis was good. I was healthy. I didn't have a reason to be concerned for my future, and just kind of went back to work doing my own things. And it was one day that I think I was reading an article in a magazine about imposter syndrome. And when I read it, I realized that that was very likely what I was suffering. And it had definitely come up in other areas of my life. But this time it was really strong because guilt was attached to it. Normally, when I suffer from feelings of inadequacy through imposter syndrome, it's directly it's directly connected to just not feeling great about myself, but the guilt was a different experience. And I decided I would learn more and started reading and talking to other people. And I discovered that because by the time I figured it out, I think I was about 50. It had been a long time of exploration. And when I figured it out, I realized that one of the things that I was having trouble recognizing was on the outside, I was portraying myself as a very successful, happy mother, which I am. And uh, everything in the outside of my world looked very good, but I was struggling with confidence. And I don't think I'd ever really stopped to understand that. I definitely had feelings of inadequacy, but I didn't realize that it was coming from a really long rooted pattern in my life. And when I started to look back and started to make discoveries about what imposter syndrome really was, it is generally people who attribute all of their success to pure luck. They don't consider themselves in any way responsible for their success. For example, it could be that I grew up in a lovely family. I was loved. I was supported. I didn't grow up poor. I had all of these things going for me. And so if I finished university, if I grew a successful business, it was because I had great contacts. It was because I had great advantages. But I never, ever attributed that I had worked hard to accomplish all of these things. And at that moment, again, right around my 50th birthday, I decided that I was going to start to get much braver. I think that the feelings of inadequacy that I was experiencing were really holding me back in my life, because if I couldn't be the best at something, I just didn't want to do it. I didn't want to try it. I didn't want to take it on. And I think that that really stunted a lot of personal and professional growth, because I was so used to just having things come easily that I really hadn't learned. I mean, obviously I had worked, but I really had never considered that I could improve upon things, and that perhaps it was my lack of confidence that was holding me back. And so I looked around and talked to other women that I really admired and thought were doing great things in their lives. And I decided that what I would do is I would start saying yes to opportunities, and I would take every opportunity I could to gain new skills. Because one of the things I discovered is when I started my design business, I felt like a fish out of water. I hadn't worked for a long time. And I felt like I was doing favors for friends. I was getting paid, but I really felt like I was doing them favors and that they had hired me because we were friends. When in fact, later I learned it was because they had been in my home and seen my work and thought I was really good at what I did. And I could never quite give myself credit for that. So I have just, like I said, taken on a mission. And in my role of doing that, have connected with a lot of other women who, again, on the outside are amazing, professional, successful women who are all feeling the same thing.
I think you're totally right. Thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for being here. The whole imposter syndrome thing, it's funny because it's come up for me again recently, and it keeps coming up. And I would guess that just about anybody who is a high performer or tries to do a lot of things and has any success probably deals with it on some level or another on an ongoing basis, in particular when they start something new or they start to put themselves out there or anything like that. So what I want to ask you is, because we're talking about the importance of sharing our stories and that process,
Yeah.
why did you decide it was important to you to share your story?
Well, I think for me, I have always been interested in education and improvement and self-help. And so I've read tons and tons of books, but I definitely found like you could follow Brené Brown, you could follow Oprah, you could have whoever you wanted to be your, say, spiritual guru or somebody that you thought could guide you. And there's great lessons to be learned from lots of these people that are out there, but they were already rich and they were obviously super successful. And I just kept thinking, well, how can they really understand what it's like to be me, like a housewife in Pitt Meadows, and someone who's not famous, and I don't have a huge network. How much could I really take from that and apply to my own life, because I didn't feel like they were ordinary people.
So it was more about you were having trouble relating you to them, even though they have great advice.
Absolutely.
So
And
would
I
you
knew
say, oh,
that
sorry,
if
go ahead.
no, I was going to say, I knew if I was having trouble, there were other people out there. And when I started my journey, I have one friend in particular that I've kind of taken along on it. And she and I are accountability buddies and where we're going and business partners and all sorts of things. But but when I found out she was going through the same things, I couldn't get over it. And I thought, if I had inspired her to be able to address those issues and want to grow in that area, how many other women could we inspire together?
So true. I and it so now you have jumped in to this collaborative book that
Yeah.
we've been working on for a few months. Why did you choose that as a way to share your story?
I think part of it for me is, again, a confidence thing. Being on camera for me is much more difficult. I've always been a writer, I've always been expressive. I love the fact that with the written word, you can continue to improve it. Where, again, something live like this that's put out there, you could come off stage and think, oh my goodness, I just wish I had shared one more point. And in writing, I was able to really go through and say, did I get my message across the way I intended to? And it was a great forum to be able to do that. I think that it was also a small enough project that it wasn't intimidating. I've always dreamt of writing and being an author, but this was a really great experience to learn from other amazing women and to go through the process and to make sure that I truly felt capable of moving forward in that field.
That's great. And are you feeling good about what you've produced?
I am. I'm nervous.
Good.
It's interesting. I've addicted right now to Clubhouse, and I've been in a number of forums talking to a number of people. And the same thing keeps coming up. I keep hearing other women who are really experiencing lack of confidence. And I think that there's definitely men out there who experience it as well. But I think the way women have generally been educated, the way we talk to each other, the way we talk to ourselves is different than men. I think we're just wired differently. And I think that we tend to experience more self-confidence issues. So I actually got an opportunity to share a little bit of this story in a room yesterday, and I was so glad I did. The story was basically for people to learn how to tell their story. And every time a woman told her story, she would say, oh, I'm sorry. I know this is not as good as the story we just heard. And I know within our book, we've all compared notes and said, oh, I hope I'm not the weakest link. And I'm so scared that my story is not important. And one of the things I definitely learned on this journey, your story doesn't have to be important to everybody to matter. Your story only has to be important to the one person who needs to hear it on that particular day. And so my message to the women in the room was, please don't stop sharing your story. You may share your story with somebody and walk away feeling like it didn't matter to them. It didn't change their life, and that's okay. But one day you're going to tell that story and it is going to completely rewire how somebody thinks or changes the way they look at their own lives. And that's what counts, is that we're all continuing to connect and share the things that we can inspire other people to feel better.
So true. And I often have said on the podcast and in lots of different places when I have this conversation, I think I even shared it with our group of authors for this book, is that because we have lived our stories, we tend to normalize it, and it doesn't feel exciting or particularly helpful for someone else or inspiring, because we live it every day. And
Yeah.
it's become, I hate this phrase, but our new normal.
Yeah.
And it's just our day after day. And but to someone outside of that who maybe is facing a challenge for the first time or has been through something similar, you never know how a phrase, a word, or your entire story will land and how much they need to hear that,
Yeah.
because it's not their normal. So
No. And it changes every time. I think that we learn in different periods of our life. There was a time when I had young children, and everything I needed to learn at that time was surrounded about how I could best parent young children. And then when I started my own business, the stories I needed to hear were how other women became successful just going into a new field or starting something small on their own. And I think at every stage of our life, we have different messages that we need to hear, and there's always different messengers.
So very true. So on kind of on that theme, who are you hoping that your story will reach and help?
I, I'm hoping, and again, I use the term women, but it could apply to men or women, anyone else. And I think who it will connect with the most is somebody who's midlife, who has gone through life and has hit a point where they realize that it's okay to be vulnerable because we only get one shot. And our story, our message, our life, how we live it is all we really have to take with us, all that matters, all that anybody's going to remember us for. And I think we get to a stage where we care less about what others think simply because we know the people in our lives are always shifting too. And I think that I recognize that different people will judge you for different reasons at again different times based on what they're going through. So what feels like a judgment one day, in 10 years from now nobody even remembers. So to just keep moving forward on your own path.
Oh, so much truth in that and so much good stuff. Now, the title of our book is called The Gift in Your Story.
Which I love that title.
Awesome. I do too. Because I talk about a lot about when we're going through the healing process, when we can find the gift, we're closer to being healed. I think healing is a lifelong process because different things will come up. But what gift or gifts did you discover through revisiting your story, writing your story, and preparing to share it?
It was interesting because I thought the gift was going to be sharing the story, and I thought that that was going to be enough for me. But when I got to the end of the process, what I realized is that I had learned how to extend the same empathy and compassion to myself that I would extend to other people. And I learned to be less critical. I learned to stop telling myself all the things that were wrong with what I did and what I could have done better, and recognize I've done my best in that moment and I can always try again. I can always grow and get better. But to congratulate myself for taking that step and moving forward and doing something that I wanted to do.
That is awesome. We're all on a journey and nobody is ever perfect. So when we recognize the things we want to improve, we improve them and we just become better people.
No, I so agree.
Thank you, Tammy. Thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing your story. And thank you even more so for being part of this whole process and sharing your story in the book coming out on February 25th,
Well, thank you for the
February
opportunity.
25.
You've been a great leader. And the thing I'm most grateful for in the whole process was the other really inspiring, amazing women I've met on this journey that I wouldn't have if I hadn't been part of the book. And so I am super, super excited to read all of their stories. I don't actually know all of their stories. So I'm just can't wait for it to come out and be able to read it myself.
Well, it's going to be great. It is a powerhouse group of women. And it is something about the power of the group and going through something together. There's an added encouragement, there's added bonding, all of those kind of things that make it much more of a full experience.
No, it was great.
So thanks for being part of it. Thanks for being here on the podcast. And can't wait for our book to come out.
Thanks. I'm looking forward to it as well. Have a great day, Kelly.
You too.